few minutes. So we are now live on Zoom, so people can join in. And so we'll see how people come together. But yeah, this is definitely a hot topic. So I'm glad that you're here with your expertise, Thomas, to kind of take us through this, because as we were talking before, just because of the more pay transparency laws that are coming out, the more companies are saying, "Hey, I got to get my stuff together, so we're ready for these types of questions that come up in the organization and concerns from our people and so forth." So it's I think it's a growing trend.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're getting more requests and people wanting it, where before, except for the people that really were social justice warriors, the majority of pay equity were because they have impending litigation, so they're trying to avoid the litigation, or it's more of a risk methodology than it is what we try to do in proactive pay equity, which is let's set you up with a transparent system, so that it's simple. Follow the KISS principle as much as you can, so that when people do ask, why am I paid what I'm paid, it's a very simple answer.
Yeah, no kidding. So now I guess we'll get in. I'll save it for the discussion here. I just want to kind of dive in there as soon as possible. I've got so many questions, but we'll give it a few more minutes as we get to the top of the hour here before we start our broadcast.
Sure.
But do you have a season where most of these projects come in, or is it pretty much regular throughout the year?
It stays pretty steady, but I think our busy time is beginning of the year and end of the year, because they've either got money left over in the back budget that they need to spend or they lose it, or it's budgeting time and they want to do this and they want to know how much it costs. But it does stay pretty steady with these kinds of inquiries, though.
Yeah, you would think that these are people would be more proactive. When you think of proactive versus defensive, I mean, do you see more people being defensive than are kind of coming to you because there's a problem?
I wouldn't say that that's the majority of things, but I would say that there are people who want to do their proactive on a little bit more of a risk-based scenario than doing full proactive. The let's see if we have a problem and fix it. There's still, a middle, which is, the risk analysis version of pay equity. So, but I think there's a lot more boards, right? So there's a lot more investors, there's a lot more boards, and there's just a lot more employees that are looking for organizations to actually, not just put it on their website anymore that we are an equal opportunity employer and we pay people fairly, but to actually test it and fix it if there's a problem.
Perfect. Hey, Denise, we're going to get started here in just a second. We're just waiting for the broadcast, but nice to see you here. We were just talking about how beautiful Colorado is and how crazy it can change. So nice to have some locals on. All right, so I'm going to go. We have one more minute before we start. And so I'm going to share our materials, and then we'll start the multicast. And in just one more minute. Let's see here. So I fight with Zoom. It's fun. Okay, so let's go ahead and kick things off. So welcome everyone to the Rewards Mastermind. We have a very exciting topic today that I know is very timely for a lot of companies and consultants out there about defensive pay equity and proactive pay policies. So this is all about ensuring that we have good, fair pay processes in our practices and so forth. And we have a very special speaker today that I'll introduce in just one moment. But first of all, just starting out of what the Rewards Mastermind is about. And so we're a group of leaders that are dedicated to creating those workplaces where people can thrive, employers reward, and customers love overall. In general, we bring on some experts like Thomas here that is going to help elevate the practice of rewards for companies across the United States and the globe, and also to ensure that people know where to go for help. And so on those, to make sure that you're aware of those specialists that are out there. So today we have Howard Nizewitz. Howard's a reward system strategist. He's also got deep expertise in compensation of over, coming on, I think, 30 years now, Howard, right? And so
make me feel old.
Yeah. So I'm getting there with you. Worked at a lot of large financial institutions, and also has supported, worked with companies on delivering compensation software. So we're glad to have him here. Also, we have Viktoria Kiseleva. Viktoria is an expert in sales and variable compensation, and she's a wonderful resource on those things. And so I think that you'll see she's a great host. She's one of our new hosts that we have here on the Rewards Mastermind. So we're fortunate to have her. And of course, my name is Sam Reeve. I bring this event to you and the people. I'm the CEO of CompTeam, and so happy to have Thomas here today. So Thomas is the manager of compensation services at Berkshire, and he works with clients who are both in current litigation or want to avoid litigation by evaluating and understanding their current state within HR and those best practices in compensation analysis and so forth. And so he's a critical resource. And I think, Thomas, I saw you speak down at the Austin fair pay conference that they had down there from World at Work, and so it was great to hear you and down there, and I feel fortunate to have you here on the show today. So as we kind of kick things off, Thomas, can you tell us a little bit about how did you get into this practice, this area overall, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the PhD industrial psychology, so went the traditional route at first. So things like test development, job analysis, validation, and all that kind of fun stuff, developing performance management systems, et cetera, et cetera. And then started, a route of thinking, maybe I want to be a professor. And so I did the teaching gig for a couple of years. And then I'm always up for a new challenge. And so a lot of colleagues that do pay equity analysis and things like that are labor economists or statisticians and things like that. And I've always felt like an industrial psychologist would bring a different viewpoint, a different lens to what is something that you don't see a lot of IO psychologists doing. And so I looked into how I could apply my skills of having taught statistics and used statistics in a different way to compensation. Got hired by a competitor originally to Berkshire, and then came over to Berkshire a little over 2.5 years ago to lead up, their group. I've got a couple master's level IO psychologists that work for me, and we're super excited to be working on these kinds of things to help companies understand it and help people in a sense, get paid what they should be getting paid. And increase the value.
Great, and I know that it's just what's really driving this greater need in pay fairness. I mean, there's, of course, it's something that we should always be thinking about for as long as we've been practitioners. But what are the main factors that are driving more attention to this topic right now?
Yeah, in the United States, it is, a fairly recent phenomenon to really, be centered around it. I think because federal agencies are being run by people, so Director Jenny Yang at the OFCCP and the EEOC as well, have made this their number one priority. It is pay equity. So I think that helped, but also state pay transparency laws. And just an understanding that in the US, we're a little behind the world when it comes to pay equity. You know, Canada's had some pretty strong laws for quite a while, overall federally and in each one, Europe, of course, and then, you know, the Pacific Northwest and California really started to take charge, and Illinois as well, passing some new pay transparency laws and how you have to report pay equity and things like that. So I think it's just something that research has continuously shown that there is an issue, not just the wage gap, you know, opportunity issue, but actually pay issues, that it's finally gotten to a boiling point where it's like you have to care. Boards are starting to care. Investors are starting to care. And so the company needs to care too, because the new generations that are coming up, the millennials, the Gen Zers, they look for those kinds of things on websites, and they don't want it to just be lip service. They don't want it to just be, we care about equal opportunity. They want to see the things that companies are doing to ensure fair practices.
And so a lot of times when do companies typically start engaging or thinking about this? I know that they should be. And I guess that really takes us to the question of what is the difference between a defensive versus a proactive approach?
Yeah, I mean, like every company should hopefully be thinking about this. It's not as expensive, in my opinion, as you think it would be. So, you know, having a judgment brought against you is what's expensive. You know, losing that lawsuit, having your name in the papers and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, you can say that we'll pay the settlement, but we still deny that we did anything wrong. It's still going to hurt, mostly in the eyes of prospective employees. And, you know, I think that pay equity has become one of those minimums of ensuring that you get the best and the brightest, because they want to feel like they're getting paid, you know, respective to their skills, and being, in a lot of ways, they see it as a term of respect, right? What we see and have seen in the past few years is that most people are interested in having that discussion with us personally about how much would this cost, what's your process, what's the end goal, what are the deliverables, and all that kind of stuff. From like November through February is a pretty hot time for these discussions, because either there's money left over in the budget that needs to get spent, or the new budget has arrived and you know, somebody's made it clear, whether that be an executive, investors, board of directors, somebody's made it clear this is a priority for this year. We want to start this journey, and it is a journey, right? So if you go the proactive pay equity route, it is a journey that takes sometimes, you know, 1 to 3 years to really identify what do you want the compensation philosophy to be. So I'll just use that kind of segue into really diving in. So the key differences between proactive and reactive / defensive analysis can be summed up into 3 questions: what, how, and why. So for proactive pay equity, what you are doing is forward looking. You're not necessarily trying to describe how past decisions have impacted pay. You're really trying to make a decision: what do we want pay to be? Who do we consider to be similar? You know, is it job families? Is it function? What are the things that we're going to use to define as pay analysis groupings? And then what are the job related things that we want to truly be impacting pay at our organization? Time and position makes sense, because everybody does, you know, something in the instance of a performance management system. So you would expect somebody that's been in that position longer to be paid more than someone who's, you know, fresh in the position. So time and position is really important. Overall time with company. So they've been involved with the compensation system of the company for a certain amount of time. So if they've been promoted, of course, time and position is different from time and company. And then something related to their external experience. So, you know, you can use a proxy. Age is a proxy for external experience. Better yet, though, is starting to document and be able to put in the HRIS system two versions of external stuff. So external lateral. So if you're hiring a manager of accounting and they've already had 5 years of experience of management in accounting, then that would be lateral experience. And then, also characterizing job-related lower experience for the position that you've hired. And and you're really just thinking about, why do we pay what we pay? You slot jobs into grades. Hopefully you've got some kind of compensation structure. Maybe you have an industry where you pay for education, so that you would pay that PhD more than the master's level, even though master's was the minimum qualification. So you think of things as it meets minimum qualifications versus exceeds. And then also, thinking about job-related certifications, you probably pay a CPA more in your accounting department than a person who does not have that CPA, but they're probably doing very similar roles. And the goal of a proactive pay equity in that process is to be very systematic and look for systemic concerns. So we're not trying to explain necessarily disparate treatment, why Mary makes less than Bob. What we're most concerned about in proactive pay equity is there a problem with, say, how pay is done for female versus male, or Asian versus Black? So we're looking very group level and looking for systemic concerns. On the defensive side, when we go through the what are we doing? We are trying to explain based upon past decisions, because we have a very sincere snapshot of data. Once the lawsuit was filed, once the OFCCP decided to audit that company and that location, et cetera, there's going to be a snapshot of data that everything needs to be highly investigated in order to determine, are there job-related reasons that pay may be different above and beyond our compensation philosophy. And I'll give you a quick example. I was involved in an audit with a company that used to do things for the Department of Defense. And so what we had was a situation in which we couldn't figure out why we had disparity amongst chemists. There was a huge disparity where men were making more than females in the chemistry department. And so we went back to the company and we were trying to figure out what's going on. Have any past decisions been made? A lot of the people we were working with were pretty new to the company. So they reached out to someone that had been there a long time. And they were like, well, yeah, we used to do these defense contracts. And actually, what we were creating needed to survive a certain level of explosion. So the FBI came in and trained volunteers so that they could prove that it was a volunteer system, trained to go out and work with explosives, go to abandoned airfields and test our equipment to make sure that it could withstand those explosions. Well, they got a pay increase because they were working with, things that could kill them and had specialized training and things like that. Well, when they didn't get that contract again, they didn't change the pay. So the people who had volunteered were still getting the extra pay for having those skills, working with explosives, et cetera, et cetera. And there we go. That's our explanation, right? And that was, probably not that surprising that more men volunteered to blow things up than women. The females stayed in the chemistry room and the men went out and blew things up. So that was accepted by the agency that was auditing and had questions and things like that. And we labeled it basically boom or no boom, a yes, no job related variable. It explained the pay differences. It got rid of the disparity. Basically, the goal of a defensive analysis is to eliminate or reduce risk to the organization, their exposure to the agency, the plaintiffs, whatever's happening, but to do it ethically, right? To do it through job-related means, not try to do things that end up being a proxy for being male or female. And that's why, this one had to come up and we had to prove that it was voluntary, right? If what we had was a manager just going to the males to say, hey, you want to learn how to blow stuff up, and didn't offer that opportunity to the females, it would have been a completely different experience. But since they could prove through documents that it was 100% voluntary, then it wasn't a proxy for being male, and we were able to use it. So moving on to the how for both of them. So the how is important for both. So I'll kind of talk about the how relating to both. There's two things you absolutely need, whether it's proactive or defensive. You need a good attorney, and an attorney who understands pay equity analysis, right? So it's not, you can use internal counsel, you can use general external counsel that are knowledgeable about employment law, but this really is something that would benefit by having an attorney with you to help guide you that is very, very knowledgeable of case law and not best practices, but common practices that we see. And that way they can provide that legal advice, because privilege is extremely important to something like this. And you don't want to find yourself in a situation getting in trouble for trying to do the right thing. And so we strongly encourage anybody that contacts us or other experts in the field to make sure that you are prepared, that in addition to the cost of the analysis and the recommendations and the advice that comes from your expert, you really should have a good and knowledgeable attorney budget as well, so that an expert like me can provide them with the recommendation, and then they can provide legal advice to the company. And that's how we keep everything protected. The other one is you just want to make sure that however you're doing this, there is attached to it a testifying expert, somebody who's willing to stand behind what they've done, stand behind the practice of what they've done. And if it does lead to a lawsuit, take the stand with the credentials to take the stand and defend the work that they've done as being fair, and encouraging equal opportunity and things like that. And so I'll finish with the why on basic differences between the two. Why you would do proactive pay equity is usually because of some kind of internal or external pressure. So we kind of talked about that early in the thing, where it's you've got shareholders, you've got applicants, you've got ESG requirements, you've got the board of directors, or the CEO woke up one day and read an article on Harvard Review or something, in which this has become a hot topic. And it's usually that kind of pressure coming from top down that gets companies interested in proactive pay equity. And for the most part of the people that I've worked with, they want to do the right thing, right? They've read the research, they've seen the articles, they've gone to conferences and listened to people talk, and they're just like, man, I wonder if we have a problem. If that person standing up in front of us is saying all companies have a problem, we're included in that. And we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to pay people differently. We want to pay people for what they're worth. So that's, typically the motivation for a proactive pay equity is like, we really want to know, and we want to fix it if we've been doing something, what I call well-intended policies creating unintended consequences. And we'll go into that in a minute, like why do we see pay equity in a second. But I want to get through the why of defensive. When you become defensive, it's because you need to, right? You've got pending legal action. The OFCCP is auditing you. You've heard grumblings, and you may have a committee of employees, and they continue asking the question over and over again. Can we see transparency? Why do I make what I make? And if the answer is, I don't know, then that's the same thing as potentially pending litigation. And so pending litigation can come from a lot of different forms. It's usually bottom up, right? So top down is where we see a lot of proactive pay equity. Bottom up is there are people who are already concerned, and you may not have the time and the luxury of going through a full proactive pay equity analysis. And so a defensive analysis is really intended to be a lot quicker within the timelines of what a plaintiff or the government would consider appropriate amounts of time to be able to explain your pay. And you can get it done and be able to have an answer a lot quicker, because it's past, it's trying to explain the past, not necessarily trying to be where do we go from here? How do we do things for the prospective future?
Well, that's really helpful. I'd like to jump back into what you said earlier, is that there's a lot of times where people have good intentions, but they get in trouble because of not having the right protections. And so a lot of our listeners are out there saying, well, geez, when do I have to call my lawyer every time I run a report with gender and ethnicity on it? I mean, what is the threshold here? Where is it? Because a lot of compensation specialists, they will do an audit after the pay review cycle to ensure that there's fairness, that there's good representation there. So can we dive a little bit deeper of when do we need to make that important phone call of getting counsel and privilege involved?
That's a great question, and that's a great question for counsel, because every counsel has a different line of where they see risk. Some counsel that I've worked with would absolutely say, yeah, don't run reports by race and gender. This is why we hired this third party to do pay equity, so that way you don't have to worry about it anymore, because it's the concern is always that you print something and you left it on the printer, or something happens and outside of the circle of friends, the privileged circle, people start finding out things are going on. And that, again, it's not a negative thing. It's just we don't want people to get punished for doing the right thing. So, unfortunately, it's an add-on. And I know it's seen as a negative to have counsel involved and things like that, and to feel like, hey, this is my job and I should be able to do my job. Absolutely. But it's about risk, right? It's about risk to the organization. And the only people who can answer that, really is who's representing that company when it comes to legal concerns. I mean, and I think they're going to want to see, I hope they would want to see, okay, what types of reports are you creating by race or gender or veteran or disability? And does it paint a picture, or is it, just something for reference? And so I where I would get the most concerned, where I feel like a lot of attorneys would get concerned, is if it paints the picture and is actually something that, if the wrong person picked it up, would have the information that they need to move something that started as proactive into a defensive analysis real fast.
I have a question though. When you're in the midst of, doing salary reviews or bonus reviews, it's an iterative process. So are you saying every time you do an analysis, it should be run by legal, because you're working with your management team and the HR team to address any potential issues?
Well, what I like to do in a proactive analysis is to build in time in between when managers know what they want to rate, and then split up their budget, to make sure everybody's getting their raise, and when the employee knows. So that if we can identify any adverse impact in how performance reviews were handed out that cannot be explained, was not documented, so that we can, if we found disparity in one group, we can affect that before the employee knows what their raise is going to be. So if somebody was supposed to get a 3%, but they're really getting a 7% because we're trying to fix some inequity problems, right, it's better that we do, have a week built in between when management knows what they want to do and when employees find out, so that the lawyers, the statisticians, people like me can get involved and make sure that everything that's being done is fair.
Yeah. Great. Then the next piece is that you mentioned about data, and of course a lot of our listeners are saying, oh, well, we got name, and we have title, and we have their pay, and we may have gender in our system and so forth like that. But as far as ethnicity, as far as their, those other data points you were mentioning, as far as that could be used in analysis, they're just simply not tracked. And so is that the first step, is starting to understand these pieces that need to be tracked and to start tracking them? And then also, should companies be holding that information themselves, or should that go to a third party like yourself?
So, step one of what I think when starting a journey, even before involving somebody like me, is what is your philosophy, right? So really nailing down, what is your compensation philosophy? What are the reasons you pay? Now, you can say, well, we do a market analysis. Well, great. But market analysis is also biased. So it's fed by companies giving their payroll. And so in addition to market analysis, we recommend that companies do job evaluation as well, so that they can identify jobs that have the same compensable worth, the same factor-based worth to the organization, but the market analysis might be different. Quick example, and this is one of the reasons Canada adopted their pay equity laws the way that they did, is that they did a huge study trying to understand why male orderlies always make more than what is a predominantly female role of the cleaners, the housekeepers and the people that clean the OR, clean rooms and all this kind of stuff. And so they hired IO psychologists and others to go in and do a job evaluation. And it actually came out that the housekeepers were more important. Their job were much more critical to the success of taking care of a patient. If they clean the OR wrong, if they clean a bed wrong, if they miss something, if they're not taking care of things, and somebody can get a staph infection and die. You know, there's a lot of things that can happen if they're not doing their job right. This is an oversimplification, and please don't come get me, orderlies, and find out where I live. But you know, if an orderly does their job really, really, really wrong, there's not that life and death kind of situation. It's an extremely important job. It's just not life and death. And so when they did the job evaluation, they found out that, this is actually more important. So then the question came up, why? Why do we pay cleaners less than orderlies? And after reviewing tons and tons of data, doing tons and tons of research, it basically was just that, well, it's because they're women. And women don't negotiate as much as men. And decade after decade, that means that position got depressed in market analysis data. And when a company does market analysis alone without job evaluation, you find that predominantly minority and predominantly female roles are typically just viewed as less compensable than predominantly male roles, even though they may have this similar worth to the organization as done by a point factor or some other job evaluation method. So that's the starting point for me, is defining your philosophy and defining your structure in a fair way. And once you've done that and you've defined what your philosophy is, to your point, Sam, now you know what data you need to start collecting. And this data is not just important to pay equity. If you do some kind of talent management, succession planning, individual development plans, when you're thinking of taking a star employee, or this person seems like they should be a star employee, a lot of people quit their jobs because they're not being challenged, or they have skills that they don't think their company is utilizing to the extent that they would want to use them. Well, having a success profile or a talent profile on every, which is what feeds pay equity as well, but having these things has a lot of use when managers are thinking about projects. And a special project has come in, and I didn't know this before, but because I've got this success profile, I know that Thomas has worked on these projects before when he was working at this other company. And now I know I can give this project to Thomas or whatever. And so, you know, that's an important part of it. And that's one of the reasons why proactive pay equity can take a little bit of time, is because that's what we do, is help identify compensation philosophies. We help identify the data the company needs. We work with the attorneys and the company to figure out what's the best way to collect this data without tipping anybody off that, hey, we're about to start a pay equity program, and things like that. But data are important, and it's important for more than just equity. And the more a company can document, and I can feel my legal colleagues wanting to high five me after I say this statement, the more you document, the safer you are for anything. Being able to document and prove the reason decisions were made, even if that's a hiring decision. Why did you bring in Viktoria higher than Howard? Experience. Okay, prove it. Well, we'll have to go back and look at their resumes. Or you could just pull it up and it's right there. It's in your data. She came in with 6 years of experience. Howard came in with 4 years of experience, and therefore she makes more.
So the other thing, I mean, what you pointed out there is that you talked about point factor, job evaluation, and so forth, and I think that's a really good thing to recognize here in the United States. The United States over the past, I don't know, 50 years has really looked at job evaluation in more of a classification sense, looking at those surveys, looking at leveling, putting them in the right function, and so forth. And then, of course, Europe and other countries have been much more concerned with internal pay fairness than market, a lot based on necessity, because their market data just stinks in a lot of places. They have to deal with that. But but it's put them ahead in this context. And so, is it possible for a company to really do a thorough fair pay assessment if they've been using the classification method?
I mean, it's possible, right? But a lot of times, if they haven't established, and one of the, a client comes to me and says, well, we have pay grades. Well, my first question is, how did you develop them? And if they say it's purely based upon market data, I'll say, okay, I'm going to send you some research. I want you to read through it, and I want you to make a decision as to whether or not that's where you want to start. You want to start at a developing a new compensation structure, or do you want to go, because it's always their choice, right? It's always about risk. It's identifying whether or not there is risk and how much risk are we willing to accept. But there's been tons of research in the US on accounting versus HR. And why is HR paid less than accountants? And we all know that both of these organizations are extremely important. If an accountant does their job wrong, they can bring the whole company down, especially if the top knew they were doing it, right? So, I mean, we think Enron, we think MCI WorldCom, we think of all these that were brought down but also in accounting, there's a lot of laws. So if you do it wrong, you shouldn't have. HR, we're more like pirates in the sense that we live by guidelines. I mean, there's definitely laws out there, but there's a lot of ways to interpret things because we're dealing with people and not numbers. And so when most companies do a job evaluation methodology, whether it be point factor or something else, they find that HR and accounting are more equal than market data. Market data definitely indicates that HR should be paid less than accounting. So again, the question was asked, why? Oh, HR is predominantly female and minority. And so over years and years and years and years and years of less negotiation, of accepting the offer that you've been given. And this is what I talk about more often than not, as this is the well-intended policy that leads to unintended consequences, is the negotiation around salary. And because you could hire two people with very equal backgrounds, and you have a budget of being willing to pay up to $110,000. And so you send out the offer to both of them of $80,000, and one of them negotiates up to 100. The other one accepts because that's 5,000 more than she was making at her last job. Maybe she's getting sexually harassed. There's a reason she's looking outside of just pay. She got an offer, it gets her out of there, she takes it. She's a rock star. She gets a 5% raise every year. You wouldn't fire him, but he's not taking on, a lot of the extra projects. He's a good average. You love to have him around employee because we need people who meet expectations. 3% raise every year. It takes her 31 years to make up for that initial $20,000 difference in their pay. So, the most important decision to any pay equity is that starting pay decision. And where most companies, find themselves allowing, again, it's not purposeful. There's very, very few people out there going, I'm going to pay this person less because they're a female. But it is one of those things where it's just like, we know the research is out there, and it's very, very clear that women and ethnic minorities are much less likely to negotiate than white males or Asian males. And so, it's very important to make sure that that's taken into account, and that policy is reviewed. Of all the pay equities I've worked on, 99% of the problem came from starting pay decisions.
So there's a lot of, we're inherent in life. We have a lot of societal inequity that currently exists in different forms across the world. And so, Viktoria, I'd like your perspective on this. I mean, as far as when we look at, there's certain jobs that women may prefer not to do. For instance, I mean, just working on an oil rig or something out in the middle of the ocean. I mean, it's a profession that's largely dominated by men. And I'm not sure, Viktoria, in your sales expertise, I mean, do you see some certain jobs that in the sales world that are dominated more by certain genders, or what are your thoughts there?
I would say it depends on the company and the industry. So for example, tech companies do tend to have more male sales reps. So that's definitely something that plays into it. But I would say typically, it's about a 60-40, maybe 70-30 split, just because if you think about the nature of the role, and of course there's different sales jobs, right? You have your hunters, you have your farmers or your account managers that are really focused on client relationships. So, if you kind of generalize and think about the more aggressive sales positions like hunters, those are typically going to be male dominated. And that's, like I said, it will definitely depend by industry, right? If you think about fashion or retail, for example, there's definitely more women in that. So it definitely depends by industry and the interests as well.
Yeah, and just the words we use. I mean, I know that there's been studies about just the words we use and job descriptions, and also in some of our traditional ways of classifying jobs, such as even in sales, when we're talking about hunters versus farmers versus customer relationship. I mean, that also has some color associated with it, right? And so, is that where you also help companies advise them in those social norms and how to correct that in organizations, Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, so if that's something that they want us to do, we've done that for a couple clients where we've kind of gone through their job descriptions and even their, employee manual. And we're just like, there's a lot of masculine language here, and so I think there might be more people interested because, one of them, they were struggling getting women in the door to do things like, tooling and dye, and mechanical kinds of things. But there's much more women than there used to be that have those skills, but they didn't want to apply with this company. They just wouldn't be getting the applications. And, it's right there. It was just right there in the announcement. It was very clear to me. And I couldn't do it, right? So I come from a perspective of, yeah, it looks okay to me, but I gave it to a couple of my colleagues, and when they read it, they were like, yeah, I wouldn't want to work here either. And so they always help, me sometimes understand that things that seem normal to even my generation is being picked up by other generations, and that we need to be a lot more careful. So we do help with that. And what I see more often, to her point, in sales is not necessarily, because sales does a pretty good job of having compensation very clear. Here's your base, and here's how much you can make if you hit these goals. And it's pretty clear on how that's done with commissions and things. But where we see pay equity concerns is with opportunity. How are regions assigned? How are things done? And one of them I think about is like the rental car industry, right? So people get bonuses and things like that on the basis of how well their area is doing. And so some people are over the airports, which do extremely well. They're constantly churning business, while other regional managers are over satellite stores that aren't open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we do see that there are some concerns when it comes to opportunity in those kinds of situations, that there are more likely to be males over the high income and females over, and it's told, do a good job here and we'll move you to a higher revenue area, which that didn't happen to the male. They weren't told to do a good job in a low revenue area and then move into a high revenue area. So sales, we see a lot more concern when it comes to how do they decide who gets what opportunity.
And to your point, Thomas, I think earlier around compensation philosophy as well, it certainly depends on the way your target incentives or your variable pay is structured. For some jobs, it's a flat, let's say 15K incentive, right? For others, it's part of their base. So if you come in at a lower base, that's going to translate into your lower incentive as well. And then it snowballs into lower total pay.
Correct. Yep.
So how do you fix that, something that's sort of built into society and the norms, that when you're negotiating and you're saying, well, men tend to negotiate stronger and better than women, you're looking to hire a candidate, it's a male, and he starts the negotiation process, do you cut it off and say, we're not going to negotiate? Or do you, then have to look back and adjust the other people that are in the job?
Well, so I would say if you've never done a pay equity process, involve more people, right? The good business decision of, I know this job is worth 80,000, but I just got somebody for 60,000. I saved the company $20,000 a year is what we're talking about here, right? If you know somebody's worth 80, pay them 80. That should be your offer, not 60. But if you've done a proactive pay equity, one of the nice things that comes out of this is you have algorithms now that you can, so for this position, you put in the pay grade, you put in their external time, you put in all of the things that were taken into account when reviewing your pay equity, and it spits out a number. This is what this person should be making in order for your equity to continue, on the way it's going. And then you can have some wiggle room there, right? You don't want to take negotiation away necessarily, but negotiation has to be documented better than it used to be, right? So it was an easy thing to say, oh, well, that person just negotiated better, or that person accepted it. It's not my fault they accepted a low offer. That should be documented, and there should be someone looking at that, right? Do you see trends that people are negotiating more that are of a certain demographic, and do we, and run pay equity every year, so that you can catch the things that are happening. So just if you have 50 pay analysis groups and 5 of them flag for disparity, it doesn't mean you forget about the other 45. Next year, you do it again because you've done things over the past year. You've hired, you've promoted, you've lost people, and you want to this is something you want to continuously check. That's why it's a journey. It's never really over. And it's important to not, I guess, lose sight that very minor changes can change, the whole picture.
Are there certain red flags or sort of leading indicators that folks can watch out for as far as maybe potential issues?
As compensation managers are sitting back in their chair and thinking, should I be thinking about this? The 3 questions I would ask myself are, 1, do we ask the question, how much money did you make in your last job? Or it's cousin, how much money do you want to make here? Which the only way that person's going to know is how much money they made on their last job. It's just a proxy question. More legal in all 50 states, whereas the other one I think is illegal in like 34 states to ask. The second question I would ask is do we allow negotiations, and do we encourage it, right? Do we lowball and have that, well, I just made a good business decision mentality? And then the third red flag I would think about is, when's the last time we did external equity? When's the last time we went out and saw how we are paying compared to our competitors? And do we have, any concern that we have our data, the market data that we bring in may have biases? Those are the first three questions I ask, typically just to get an idea of what I'm going to be dealing with. And then the last one is, what's your performance management system? How did you create it? And how objective versus subjective is it? It's always subjective, unless we're talking about people building widgets and how many widgets did you build in an hour. But for the most part, there are really good practices out there to make even the most subjective ones more objective, level setting and things like that. But a lot of companies don't see that as useful. And a lot of managers are like, well, just because I'm a severe rater doesn't mean I'm severe to everyone. Well, you're one of two managers that oversee people like this, and the other person's a lenient rater. So your people aren't going to be getting opportunities that the other managers are going to get, because they're all 4 to 5 and yours are all 2 to 3. And so it's just important to think through how every decision that HR makes impacts equity. But those are the first three that I think about.
Well, perfect. Well, this has been a really great discussion, Thomas. As we think about everything that we've gone over today, what are the key takeaways that you want our listeners to hear today?
Yeah, so I guess I would have like 6 basic things that I think every company should be doing. Number 1, engaging with legal counsel that's knowledgeable about this kind of stuff. Number 2, really consider how you're doing your external equity, and if you want to dive into that thing of job evaluation. It isn't super expensive to add job evaluation to a market analysis for us, at least. I don't know about other companies. It's definitely a way of making sure that you're taking into account both. And in California, it's actually required, right? So if you do market analysis, you're supposed to be doing comparable worth. You're supposed to be doing job evaluation. And if you have any employees in Canada, again, it's required by law. Really think through what your compensation philosophy should be, right? Not what it's been. This is a good time with all these transparency laws that are coming out to think about, okay, it's been really complicated in the past, but does it need to be? Can we use the KISS principle and make it a lot easier for when somebody walks into the compensation office and says, why am I paid what I'm paid? Boom, there you go, 5 factors. and this is why you're paid what you're paid. To really be thinking about in that compensation philosophy of how you want to separate people, but also what are the things that should be related to pay. I'll just say the top 5 again: time and position, time with organization, external experience, education, and certifications. But on top of that, what in your industry, in the type of work that you do, what are the other things that you're willing to pay for? It may be bringing in leads, right? So you're not a salesperson, but you want to compensate people for bringing in new business because they're the ones maybe that have the relationship. So upsell, cross-sell, all that kind of stuff. I highly encourage all companies to stop doing shoulder tap promotions. Shoulder tap promotions fall to the bias of similar to me much more often than promoting the person that's really going to be best at the next level. The manager is more likely to promote the person that they would want to have a beer with than the person who would be highly successful in the role. And because of that, it tends to follow in demographics as well. White males are more likely to put forward the names of white males in a shoulder tap promotion than they are other people. And so, companies really, it's already the law in Colorado where I live that, shoulder tap promotions cannot be done. They all have to be competitive. And then finally, really thinking through whether or not it's a good time to start a robust pay equity program. And again, it's a journey, so it can be something that's spread out so that it's not, a huge burden on your budget. It can be, minor decisions over a course of 1 to 3 years, so that the organization can notice, oh, we have a hole here, let's fix it before we keep going with pay equity. And that's totally fine. And to, think of this, like I said, as more of the end goal is not instant gratification, unless we're talking about defensive analysis, because the end goal is to instantly find a way to reduce or eliminate risk.
So I appreciate you sharing all your analysis here, Thomas. It's been a great conversation. Can you tell us a little bit more about if people have questions, how they get a hold of you? What type of services you might provide or programs that you have here in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. So Berkshire, just who I work for, is an affirmative action company. So the main company produces affirmative action plans for government contractors. My team is a growing but small part of it. And then we are a part of Resolution Economics, which is a large economist firm, labor economist firm that does wage and hour and all that kind of stuff. So any questions really about comp and litigation, my email address is my first name dot my last name at berkshireassociates.com. Feel free to reach out. And if I'm not the person, then I'll find the person at ResEcon, right? So if you have concerns about wage and hour, more than happy to pass that on. But what my team does can basically fit into 4 buckets. One, of course, what we've been talking about today, proactive pay equity. We love to work with people who want to find out, are willing to put forth the effort to say, do we have a problem? And if we do, we want to fix it, right? And so we do that in a manner that is easy on the budget, and reduces risk to the organization by making sure that the lawsuits for potential back pay, if we do find a concern, are we can't eliminate the risk, but our methodology helps to reduce the risk. We have a network of lawyers, of attorneys that we work with that we can recommend. The second bucket of things that we do is we do market analysis and job evaluation. So we would be happy to work with anybody, especially small or medium enterprises, because it's better to get it done while you're small and have that structure to grow into than it is to go, oh, okay, we have 100,000 employees and we don't have grades. That's a hard thing to do. And we also do the defensive analysis, right? So for people that find themselves in some kind of hot water, again, we work with a network of attorneys. We're in the Rolodexes of some of your favorite ones, I'm sure. Feel free to ask for us, right? If you find yourself in that situation, and more likely than not, it would be a combination of me and somebody from ResEcon working on that with you, because our perspectives are, diverse but needed in this kind of analysis. And then the fourth one is we do a lot of just like preliminary kind of analyses. So we can do statistical outlier, wage gap, and different things, the Illinois law, the California law. So we do a lot of state laws as well. So we're deep in that kind of stuff, and we're always ever expanding as well. So eventually we will start doing more traditional IO stuff again. So job analysis, building performance management systems and things like that. But we are trying to make sure that we don't grow too fast and lose, the level of connection that we have with each one of our clients.
Well, thank you so much for that, Thomas, and being with us today here on the Rewards Mastermind. It's been a very enlightening and a pleasure to have you on. Thank you.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, have a wonderful week, everyone, and we'll see you next month on the Rewards Mastermind. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.